31, 32, 30 feet. Coming down.
Okay, strap in, because we're dropping right into the capsule for this explainer. Imagine the extreme speed, the crushing G-forces, and just the absolute terrifying disorientation of what's about to happen. We're diving into one of the most astonishing, yet somehow overlooked, moments in the entire history of human spaceflight. This is the story of how NASA almost lost Apollo 12, and how one incredibly obscure, seemingly tiny detail completely averted a total catastrophe.
So picture this situation. We are exactly 36 seconds into launch. The massive Saturn V rocket is climbing perfectly into the Florida sky. The crew is strapped in, the engines are roaring, and all systems are completely nominal. But then, literally in the blink of an eye, everything changes.
Without any warning whatsoever, every single alarm in the capsule goes off, all at once. The master caution light illuminates, warning sirens absolutely flood the cabin, and suddenly the astronauts are just staring at this blinding wall of flashing lights. And remember, they're still inside Earth's atmosphere. They are burning through the absolute most dangerous and volatile phase of the entire mission, pushing through immense aerodynamic pressure. It's just a total cascade of failures. The fuel cells, which by the way are the primary power source for the entire ship, they just go offline. The navigation platform, the very thing that tells the spacecraft which way is up and where it's actually going, starts spinning wildly out of control. To anyone watching, it looks like a complete, catastrophic electrical system failure. Right in the middle of this absolute chaos, Pete Conrad, the mission commander, turns to his crew and radios down a sentence that honestly barely makes sense in the moment. He says, "I don't know what happened. I'm not sure we haven't been hit by lightning." Just take a second to let that realization sink in. A massive rocket, filled to the brim with highly explosive fuel, mid-flight, struck by lightning. Well, he was right. They had been hit, but here's the crazy part. They weren't just struck once, they were struck twice. The Apollo 12 spacecraft literally became a giant flying lightning rod. And what played out over the next few moments would dictate whether the second moon landing ended in triumph or a tragic fireball. Which begs the question, how do you end up launching into a storm in the first place? Let's break down this timeline, because it's incredibly tight. At 11:22 a.m., they achieve liftoff. Just 30 seconds later, boom, the first strike hits. At 54 seconds, the second strike hits. And by the 100-second mark, the fate of the mission is completely decided. We are talking about a microscopic 100-second window where life, death, and millions of dollars of engineering hung entirely in the balance. So why even risk launching? Well, it was November 14th, 1969, and NASA's own weather criteria stated the conditions were right on the edge of acceptable: overcast, low clouds, an active storm system nearby. But, on the other side of the scale, you had intense political pressure. President Richard Nixon was literally sitting right there in the viewing stands. Plus, the launch window to reach their highly specific landing site on the moon was tight, so the pressure to proceed was just immense. Here's the science of what went wrong. At 6,000 feet up, the Saturn V rocket passes through a layer of highly charged clouds. Now, you have this massive metallic body trailing an enormous ionized exhaust plume behind it all the way down to the launch pad. It created a perfect conductive path between the clouds and the ground. The rocket essentially completed a circuit. They didn't just passively get hit by lightning, they triggered it. The result? A massive, massive voltage surge. The Apollo command module was an extraordinarily complex electrical system that relied on a perfectly stable flow of power. When that lightning hit, hundreds of circuits were instantly overwhelmed. The 3 primary fuel cells tripped offline just to protect themselves, and the vital telemetry data, that critical stream of information telling Houston what was actually happening, became completely scrambled. And that brings us to the climax of this explainer, the 100-second crisis. Meanwhile, down in Houston, Mission Control is staring at screens full of contradictory, nonsensical gibberish. Imagine being a flight controller responsible for the lives of 3 men, and your instruments are basically speaking a broken foreign language. The sheer desperation in that room was palpable. Ground controllers were actively debating an abort. And an abort at this altitude would mean jettisoning the capsule, deploying parachutes, and violently dumping the astronauts right into the rough Atlantic Ocean. It was the absolute last resort. Pete Conrad's transmission sums it up perfectly. We had everything in the world drop out. But enter our unlikely hero. Down in Mission Control, a young flight controller named John Aaron was staring at his console. Now, what's really fascinating about John Aaron is that he had this habit of obsessively studying obscure, highly unusual failure signatures in the data. And he recognized this bizarre pattern of scrambled numbers on his screen. Months earlier, during a routine, completely unrelated power test, he had seen this exact same weird signature. Because of that, he knew there was a specific switch that might reset the power routing. He keys his mic and drops 5 words to the flight director that literally changed history. Try SCE to auxiliary. Think about the sheer gravity of this moment. The flight director had never even heard of that switch. The Capcom, the astronaut whose whole job is talking to the crew, he'd never heard of it either. But miraculously, somehow, sitting up there in the shaking capsule, lunar module pilot Alan Bean remembered it. It was a switch that almost never appeared in their standard training scenarios. Let's trace how this incredible recovery actually played out. Bean reaches over and flips the SCE switch to auxiliary. Instantly, the telemetry returns to Houston's screens. The warning lights start clearing. The fuel cells are carefully reset. The navigation is manually realigned by the crew. And just like that, the spacecraft is saved. Okay, so what does this all mean for us today? Let's talk about real-world system failures. This near miss fundamentally changed how we handle safety protocols here on Earth. It boils down to a core engineering principle called unknown failure mode recovery. It asks a simple but honestly terrifying question. What happens when a system encounters a scenario that wasn't in the design specifications? Because the reality is you simply can't plan for everything. Anticipating the unanticipated is the true test of any complex system. You can actually see the ripples of Apollo 12 across major industries today. Look at aviation. Engineers realized that a wall of simultaneous alarms is way too disorienting. That led to the dark cockpit philosophy, where secondary alerts are actively suppressed so pilots can focus purely on the critical failure. Now, look at nuclear power. During the 1979 Three Mile Island incident, operators faced hundreds of alarms going off at once. The lessons from Apollo 12 directly informed the need for alarm prioritization systems in those control rooms. And finally, software engineering. When we build complex apps today, we use circuit breakers to prevent cascading overloads, which exactly mirrors how Apollo's fuel cells tripped offline to save the wider electrical grid. So, what's the ultimate defense against the unknown?
Well, John Aaron's incredible save wasn't just blind luck. It was defined by what Gene Kranz famously called the tough and competent standard. In NASA's mission control, there was this explicit expectation that controllers deeply, intimately understood the systems far beyond their own assigned responsibilities. John Aaron wasn't assigned to study that obscure telemetry glitch months earlier. He did it because he was curious, and because the culture absolutely demanded that level of deep, proactive understanding.
If you take anything away from this explainer, let it be these core takeaways. First, complex systems are inevitably going to fail when they're pushed to the edge of their envelope. Second, surviving that failure requires deep, often very unglamorous preparation. And third, safety rules are almost always written in the wake of near misses. In fact, right after this mission, NASA immediately changed its weather launch criteria. The weather conditions they flew through on November 14, 1969, would absolutely under no circumstances be permitted today. But despite the sheer chaos of those first 100 seconds, the mission was a total success. On November 19, 1969, Apollo 12 completed its journey and safely touched down on the lunar surface. And bringing this whole narrative full circle, they landed at a location with an incredibly fitting, almost poetic name, the Ocean of Storms. I want to leave you with a provocative thought to ponder. We all operate within complex systems, right? Whether it's our businesses or technology or our teams. When things go completely off script and all the alarms start flashing at once, who in your system is doing the unglamorous work of studying the obscure anomalies? Because when the lightning strikes, those are the unsung heroes who will save the day.